Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, published in 1818, a Lantern Library retelling. It is the year 1700, and I am Robert Walton, commander of an expedition bound for the high Arctic. For months, my ship has pressed through the northern seas, guided by charts few have dared to follow. My dream, to be the first to chart a safe passage through the polar ice and into the unclaimed waters beyond, had carried me through storms, through nights of bitter cold, and through long days when the only company was the creak of the ship's timbers and the gulls circling above. The sea had grown stranger the further north we traveled. In the early days, we sailed through stretches of open water, the wind swelling our sails. But soon the water thickened with floes, each one groaning as it scraped the hull. The sun, when it appeared, sat low in the sky, a pale coin barely lifting above the horizon, and the light it cast turned the ice a ghostly blue. We had been trapped for days now, locked in by a shifting wall of ice. The men kept busy with repairs and scraping frost from the rigging, but I could feel unease settling over the crew. The air was so still, it was as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then, one morning, the lookout's voice cut through the silence. Something ahead, a sledge, on the ice. We crowded to the rails. Through my spyglass, I saw it. A dog sled moving steadily across the frozen waste. The rider was a giant of a man, wrapped in furs, his figure towering over the sled. Even from that distance, there was something unnatural in his proportions. We hailed him, waving our arms, but he did not turn. Within minutes, the fog thickened and swallowed him whole. That night, the men spoke in low voices of what they had seen. Some swore it was no man at all. I could not say. The next afternoon, the cry came again. This time it was another sledge, smaller, broken, drifting on a loose slab of ice. The figure upon it was no giant. He was a man, but in such a state that I wondered if he had any life left in him. His skin was frost-bitten, his lips split, his eyes sunken deep. We hauled him aboard at once. Wrapped in blankets, with hot broth at his lips, he began to recover. It was then he gave his name, Victor Frankenstein. Even in his weakness, there was something fierce in his gaze. The look of a man who had pursued something far beyond the endurance of ordinary flesh and spirit. When I asked what had brought him to this place, he replied with a voice that was little more than a whisper, "To seek out the one who has fled me, the demon I unleashed into the world." I pressed no further then, but later, when the ship lay silent in the ice, I found him in my cabin. He told me that, before the ice claimed us both, I must hear his story, for it was not only the tale of his life, but a warning to all who would dare the paths he had walked. I was born in Geneva, into a family blessed with comfort, respect, and affection. My father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was a man admired for his public service. My mother, Caroline, possessed a warmth and patience that seemed boundless. Our home sat near the shores of the lake, where the mountains rose like sleeping titans against the sky. I grew up surrounded by beauty, clear waters that mirrored the clouds, forests alive with birdsong, and the pure air that swept down from the Alps. From my earliest days, I was curious about the workings of the world. I would sit for hours turning over shells, examining the patterns on leaves, or asking my father why the stars seemed to move in slow procession across the sky. When I was still a child, my parents adopted a young girl from a poor family, Elizabeth Lavenza. She was fair-haired and calm of manner, with eyes that seemed always to carry the light of the sun. My mother called her the beautiful gift, and from that moment she became part of me. We were not siblings in blood, but we were bound by something even deeper, the sense that our lives were meant to be lived side by side. Another of my closest companions was Henry Clerval. Where I was drawn to books and inquiry, Henry was drawn to tales of knights, of quests, of romance. He was the heart to my mind, always urging me to balance study with life, though I did not always listen. The moment that changed my life came one summer when I was still a boy. A storm gathered over the mountains, the clouds black and boiling. My father and I stood outside as lightning split the sky. In a single flash, a bolt struck an old oak in our garden. Before my eyes, it was torn to splinters, the trunk reduced to blackened fragments. I was not afraid. I was enthralled. I asked my father how such a force could exist, and though he spoke of natural laws, I knew there was more to learn. Soon after, I discovered the works of ancient natural philosophers: Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, Albertus Magnus. They spoke of transmutation, of the elixir of life, of bending nature to human will. My father dismissed them as outdated dreams, but I devoured their pages. By the time I was a youth, my mind was set. I would pierce the veil between life and death itself. When I was 17, fate turned. My mother fell ill, and though she fought with quiet courage, she died before the winter's end. On her deathbed, she took my hand and Elizabeth's together, whispering her wish that one day we would marry. Grief shadowed my departure for the University of Ingolstadt. Yet in that grief there was a fire, a need to master the forces that had taken her from me. At Ingolstadt, I met two professors who would shape my path. One, Professor Kremper, dismissed my earlier studies as childish fantasies. The other, Professor Waldman, spoke of modern science not as a thing of magic, but as a tool to uncover the deepest truths of nature. It was Waldman who said to me, "The ancient teachers promised impossibilities. The modern masters perform what the ancients only dreamed." And so the old alchemy and the new science joined in my mind. And the thought came, if one could understand the very principle of life, could it not be bestowed? Could death itself be defied? It was a question I would not let go. Ingolstadt became the forge in which my mind was shaped. The lectures were precise, the laboratories alive with the smell of chemicals, the hiss of flame beneath glass. I absorbed every lesson, but it was not enough merely to learn what was known. I wanted to uncover what was hidden. I began my own studies at night, poring over anatomy, physiology, and the mysteries of decay. I visited dissecting rooms where the air was thick with the stench of preservation fluids. I examined the structure of bone, the arrangement of muscle, the delicate network of nerves. The more I learned, the more the idea took hold that life itself might be recreated, not in the way nature had ordained, but by the deliberate act of man. The thought no longer seemed impossible. Nature followed laws. If those laws could be mastered, perhaps they could be imitated. And if they could be imitated, they could be commanded. I ceased writing to my family as often. Letters from Elizabeth and my father went unanswered for weeks. I withdrew from the society of other students. My world narrowed to my work. I decided the body must be large, 8 feet in height, proportioned accordingly. Not from any wish to make it monstrous, but so that the delicate work of reconstruction might be easier. I went to places most men avoid, the damp vaults beneath hospitals, the charnel houses where bones lay piled, the slaughterhouses where fresh sinew could be had. I took only what I needed, but over time I gathered enough to assemble a whole frame. Months bled into each other. My hands grew calloused, my eyes hollow from lack of sleep. I worked by candlelight, the shadows thrown on the walls stretching and twisting with each flicker of the flame. In those hours, I thought not of the consequences, only of the goal. I imagined the gratitude of mankind. I imagined a new race of beings, strong, immune to illness, perhaps destined to revere me as their creator. At last, the time came. It was a night of relentless rain. The wind rattled the shutters, and the gutters overflowed with the downpour. In my small laboratory, the air was heavy with the scent of oil and damp stone. The figure lay on the table before me, the culmination of nearly 2 years of work. Every detail was in place. The limbs powerful, the joints strong, the skin carefully chosen and stretched to cover the muscles beneath. I had tried to make the features beautiful, but something in the proportions had gone awry. Even in stillness, there was something unsettling in the face. I made the final connections, my heart thundering in my chest. A sudden flash lit the room. The machinery hummed. And then a stir. The chest rose in a slow breath. The eyes opened. They were a watery yellow, fixed on me with a strange uncertainty. The lips trembled, as though trying to form a word. The skin, pale and stretched, seemed almost translucent under the light. In that moment, all the triumph, all the anticipation, turned to a sickening dread. The thing was alive. But it was hideous. I staggered back. I felt the cold hand of panic close around my throat. Without thinking, I fled the room. I could not sleep. I paced the narrow space of my lodgings, every creak of the floorboards making me start. At dawn, exhaustion claimed me for a short while. But when I awoke, the sight that greeted me turned my stomach. The creature was gone. The table lay empty, the instrument still and silent. Relief mingled with fear. Had it fled into the streets? Was it still within the building? I did not dare to search. That day, I walked the city in a haze. The streets were slick with rain, the air thick with the scent of wet stone. I imagined I could feel eyes on me from every shadow. By the time I returned to my rooms, my body was trembling. Fever set in. My mind burned with visions of the thing, its yellow eyes, its heaving chest. I was ill for months, racked with shivering fits and wild dreams. It was Henry Clerval who saved me. One afternoon, as the fever broke, I opened my eyes to see him standing at my bedside, his face full of concern. "Good God, Victor, what has happened to you? You look as if you've been at death's door." I tried to answer, but my voice failed me. Henry would not let me speak further. He tended me patiently, reading aloud, coaxing me to eat, speaking of home. Slowly, the sickness loosened its grip. I laughed again, though in truth, it was a hollow sound, for I could not banish the memory of that night. When at last I stepped into the streets again, the winter had passed. The air was warmer, the light softer, but I could not feel the joy of the season, for somewhere, in the city, in the world, my creation was walking. Months passed in Ingolstadt. I began to regain my strength, but my thoughts still wandered toward home. It was in the spring that a letter came from my father. The words seemed to blur as I read. My youngest brother, William, had been found dead. He had been playing outside Geneva when he went missing. Hours later, they found him in a grove just outside the city, lifeless, with the marks of strangulation on his neck. I set out at once. The journey was long, and each mile seemed to press heavier on my chest. By the time I neared Geneva, evening had fallen. Clouds rolled over the mountains, and the air carried the sharp scent of an oncoming storm. Rather than go directly into the city, I wandered into the foothills. I told myself it was to collect my thoughts before facing my family. But in truth, I feared what I might find there. Lightning lit the mountains, revealing the jagged lines of the peaks. As I crossed a narrow path, a flash split the sky. And in that moment, I saw him, my creation. He was larger than I remembered, his frame towering, his movement swift and sure over the rocky ground. For an instant, the lightning carved every detail into my mind. The yellow gleam of his eyes, the tightness of his skin over corded muscle, before the darkness swallowed him again. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the storm. There was no doubt the murderer of my brother stood before me. When I reached home, the air inside was heavy with grief. My father embraced me, his face drawn with sorrow. Elizabeth, pale and shaken, told me the news I had not expected. Justine Moritz, the young woman who had lived with us for years, had been arrested for William's murder. The evidence seemed damning. A locket belonging to William, a gift from our mother, had been found in the pocket of her dress. I knew at once that she was innocent. I also knew who had placed it there. At her trial, Justine spoke with quiet dignity. She described the night she had searched for William, how she had taken shelter in a barn, how she awoke to find the locket in her possession without knowing how it had come there. I could have spoken. I could have told them about the being I had created, the thing with strength enough to crush the life from a child. But who would believe me? To confess would be to expose myself as a man who had meddled with the very laws of life and death. My silence sealed her fate. The verdict was guilty. She met it without tears, though Elizabeth clung to her, pleading with the judges to see reason. I visited Justine before the sentence was carried out. She did not curse me for my silence. She even smiled, saying she was ready to meet her end. But her forgiveness was more terrible than any accusation. The next morning, she was gone. 2 lives had now been taken by my hands, though I had not struck the blows myself. Unable to bear the sight of the city, I fled into the mountains. I wandered for days among the high passes, the air thin and sharp, the glaciers groaning under the weight of centuries. It was there, on the Mer de Glace, that I saw him again. He stood upon the ice, his great frame stark against the white. The wind tore at my coat, but he seemed untouched by the cold. I clenched my fists, ready to strike. But he raised his hands in a gesture of peace. You hate me, yet I am your creation. Do you not owe me justice? Justice. You have murdered my brother, condemned an innocent woman to death, and you speak to me of justice. Hear me. You may despise me, but do not refuse to listen. My life has been misery from the moment I opened my eyes. If I must be a demon, let it be because you made me so. But grant me the chance to speak. You will not move me to pity. Perhaps not, but I ask not for your pity, only your ear. Hear my story, and then judge if I am truly the only monster in this tale. Something in his voice, deep, resonant, almost human in its sorrow, held me. Against my will, I followed him to a small shelter of rock. Inside, shielded from the wind, he began. When I awoke to life, I knew nothing. The light burned my eyes. The sounds around me were strange and harsh. Hunger gnawed at me, and the cold drove me to seek shelter. I wandered in forests, fed on berries and roots, drank from clear streams. The sun warmed me by day, but the nights froze my blood. When I approached villages, the people fled in terror. Stones struck me, doors slammed against me. I did not know why. At last, I found a small cottage at the edge of the forest. Within lived a blind old man, his son, and his daughter. I hid in a lean-to beside their home. From a crack in the wall, I watched them. They spoke with gentleness to one another, even in hardship. I learned their names. De Lacy, Felix, and Agatha. I listened to their words and began to imitate them. In the woods, I practiced speaking to the trees, to the birds, until my tongue could form their sounds. I wanted to help them. At night, when they slept, I gathered firewood, cleared snow, mended what I could. They never saw me, but I dreamed that one day they might welcome me as a friend. The creature paused, his gaze distant, as though seeing the little cottage again. Then came the day I dared to enter. The old man was alone. I spoke to him, told him of my loneliness, my wish to find a companion. He listened kindly, for he could not see my face. But before I could say more, Felix returned. His eyes fell upon me, and in an instant his kindness turned to horror. He struck me, drove me from the house. By the next day the cottage was empty. They had fled, and something in me broke. I waited for days near the empty cottage, thinking they might return, but they never did. At first, my sorrow was too great for anger. I wandered the woods, remembering the music of Agatha's voice, the firm kindness of Felix's hand upon his father's arm, the blind man's patient listening. But hunger and cold came again. I approached other homes, and each time I was met with the same screams, the same flight. I began to understand that it was my face, the twisted lips, the unnatural skin, the sunken eyes, that marked me as an enemy before I could speak. The warmth I had imagined between myself and mankind turned to ice. My heart, once eager to love, began to dwell on thoughts of revenge. The creature's voice deepened, his eyes narrowing as though reliving each moment. I returned to the De Lacy cottage once more. This time I came not to wait, but to destroy. I set fire to their home. The flames rose high, the roof fell in, and soon there was nothing but charred wood hissing in the rain. I turned away and walked into the night, the fire still burning in my thoughts. For weeks I wandered without aim, until I came upon a young boy playing near the edge of a city. He was fair-haired, lively, and I thought perhaps a child would not yet have learned to fear me. I caught him by the arm. He struggled, calling for help. Then he spoke his name, William Frankenstein. The moment I heard it, I knew he was yours. My anger rose, for I thought, if I cannot touch my Creator's heart with kindness, I will touch it with pain. He screamed, calling me an ogre, a monster. In that rage, I closed my hands around his neck. His cries stopped. He was still. The words hung in the cold air of the shelter. I found in his clothing a locket, a miniature of a beautiful woman. Later, I came upon a girl asleep in a barn. She was finely dressed. I thought her of a higher station, perhaps under your protection. I slipped the locket into her pocket. I wanted the guilt to fall where it would wound you most. You know the rest. Her trial, her death. I watched it all from a distance. Why tell me this? Is it not enough that you have taken the lives of the innocent? Must you glory in it? I do not glory. I tell you so you will understand why I demand what I do. You made me strong, stronger than any man, yet condemned me to walk alone. Every eye that falls upon me turns to fear or hatred. I have no father but you, no friend, no mate. Give me one who will not turn away, one who will see in me not horror, but likeness. We will live far from the world of men, in the wild places where no one will follow, and you shall never see us again. And if I refuse, then I will make you curse the day you were born. I will destroy all that you love. You may seek to end me, but remember, I am stronger, faster, more enduring than you. You cannot escape me. I looked into his face and saw no deception. His words were a promise and a threat. The wind outside howled over the glacier. I weighed my choices. If I refused, I knew what would come. If I agreed, perhaps I could rid the world and myself of him forever. At last, I said, I will do it. But you must swear to leave the world of men. You must swear never to return. I swear it, by the sun that warms me and the earth that bears me. But do not delay, Victor. My patience has limits. He turned and strode away into the snow, his figure swallowed by the mist until only the sound of his heavy steps remained. When I returned home, my father greeted me with relief, but Elizabeth's eyes searched mine as though she sensed the burden I carried. I told no one of my agreement with the creature. Henry Clerval, ever the loyal friend, insisted on accompanying me for part of the journey north. His cheerfulness was a balm, though I could not match it. We traveled by boat, the river broad and calm beneath a pale sky. At night, I dreamed of the task ahead, of the second creation lying on my workbench, of the creature's face pressed against the glass to watch. We parted in London. I told Henry I had work to do in Scotland before returning. Alone, I continued northward, the landscape growing more rugged and windswept. The mountains here were darker, their peaks jagged, the air heavy with salt from the sea. At last, I found the place, a small, isolated hut on a barren stretch of coast. The waves crashed endlessly against the rocks. No neighbors, no chance of intrusion. I set up my tools. Once again, I began to gather the parts I would need, though each step seemed heavier than before. The thought of creating another like him filled me with dread. Still I worked. Days passed, the wind tearing at the roof, the gulls wheeling overhead. One evening, as the light faded, I glanced toward the window. He was there. The creature's face pressed to the glass, eyes fixed on the half-finished form on my table. His expression was unreadable. Hunger, perhaps, or anticipation. I looked down at my work and felt a wave of revulsion. What if she rejected him? What if they bred, creating a new race of beings that might overrun mankind? The answer came in a surge of impulse. I seized the scalpel and tore the work to pieces. The sound of rending cloth and breaking glass filled the room. Outside, the creature's roar cut through the wind, a sound not wholly human. He vanished from the window, but a moment later his voice carried on the air. "You are my creator, yet I am your master. I will be with you on your wedding night." After destroying my second creation, I left the hut that night and walked along the cliff path, my thoughts a storm as fierce as the sea below. I had barely gone a mile when I heard footsteps behind me. The creature emerged from the shadows. "You have destroyed my hopes. Very well. I told you I would be with you on your wedding night, and I will. But before that day comes, you shall feel the weight of my hatred." He turned away, striding off into the darkness, leaving those words burning in my mind. A few days later, I traveled to a nearby town on business, hoping to leave that cursed coastline behind me. But before I could depart, I was summoned to the magistrate's office. There, upon a table, lay a shrouded form. The sheet was pulled back, and I saw the lifeless face of Henry Clerval. The marks on his neck were unmistakable, the same as William's, the same as Elizabeth would bear. A cry tore from my throat. I collapsed beside my friend. They accused me of the murder. Witnesses claimed to have seen me near the scene. I was thrown into a cell, fevered and half-mad. For weeks, I drifted between waking and nightmare. Henry's face, William's, Justine's, and behind them all, the creature's yellow eyes watching from the shadows. At last, letters from my father proved my innocence. I was released, though my body was wasted, my spirit frayed. I returned to Geneva. My father pressed for my marriage to Elizabeth, hoping it would restore me. I agreed, not from hope of happiness, but because I knew the confrontation with the creature was near. We were wed in a quiet ceremony. That evening we traveled to a lakeside inn for our honeymoon. The sun dipped low, turning the water to gold. Elizabeth walked with me along the shore, her hand light on my arm. She looked up at me and said softly, "Something troubles you still, even now, on our wedding night." I forced a smile, but my eyes were fixed on the darkening tree line. After dinner, I left her in our room, intending to search the grounds for the creature. I had not gone far when a scream tore through the air. I ran, my heart pounding, and burst into the room. Elizabeth lay across the bed, her head hanging limply over the side. Her eyes were wide, fixed on nothing. The marks of strangulation stood out against her pale skin. Through the open window, I saw a figure retreating into the night. Tall, powerful, his form lit for an instant by lightning before vanishing into the storm. I called after him, but my voice was drowned by the thunder. When we returned to Geneva with Elizabeth's body, my father's strength gave way. Within days, he was dead, struck down not by illness, but by grief too heavy to bear. I stood in the empty halls of our home, surrounded by silence. The creature had taken everything. There was nothing left to lose. I swore then that I would not rest until I had destroyed him. I tracked him across rivers, mountains, and fields. Always he was ahead, leaving behind scraps of food, messages carved into wood or stone. Follow me. Catch me if you can. The chase led me north, through bitter winds and endless snow. At last, I reached the edge of the Arctic Sea. I secured a sledge and dogs and pressed on across the ice, the horizon a blur of white and shadow. Sometimes I saw him in the distance, a black shape against the pale waste. Sometimes I heard his voice on the wind, taunting, urging me onward. Then, one night, the ice beneath me cracked and shifted. My sledge drifted on a loose floe, carrying me toward certain death, until I was found by the ship of Captain Robert Walton. Victor's strength failed rapidly. He told me his tale in full, each word etched with the weight of memory. He spoke of ambition, of the thirst for knowledge, and of the terrible price it had exacted. "Learn from me," he said, "that man must not play at being God." Nothing I sought was worth the lives it destroyed. He died that night. I sat by his body, the lamps swaying in the cold wind that found its way through the seams of the ship. It was near dawn when I heard a sound, a heavy tread in the passageway. I rose, and there in the cabin doorway stood a figure that filled the frame. The creature. His great hands hung at his sides, his head bowed. So, he's gone. My father, my only companion, and the one who cursed me with life. I stepped between him and the body, but he did not advance. "You look at me with fear. It is well. I have earned it. I have done deeds that chill the blood, but I was not born to evil. I came into the world eager to love, and was met with nothing but hatred. Misery made me a fiend. He is dead now, and I have no purpose left. My vengeance is spent. I sought to make him suffer, but in truth I suffered more." His voice faltered. For a moment he looked less like a demon and more like a man broken beyond repair. "I will go where no man can follow, to the ice, to the cold, to my death. And there I shall find peace, if such a thing is possible for one such as I." He moved to the open hatch. The wind caught his ragged coat, whipping it around his massive frame. "Farewell, Walton. Remember what you have heard. Let it be a warning." With that, he stepped onto the ice. I watched him walk across the frozen sea, growing smaller until the mist swallowed him. I never saw him again,